East and West learning connections.
Helps people of different cultures break barriers and connect with each other.
It's my pleasure to introduce Martin to our series of entrepreneurship seminars. So Martin Copeland was managing director of Content Management Corporation with office through North America. This company was acquired by Multiview um, in 2011. Martin remained for 2 years on the management contract as SVP with nearly 700 employees, which generates more than $100 million sales in a year. Martin was honored the most coveted award for Canadian Society of Association of Executives, National Business Members in this in John Greiner Award in 1992. In addition, he was Business Member of the Year for Toronto chapter of CSAE and served on board of director for Tourism Toronto. Martin was also past chair of Foundation of Association of Research Education as part of president of this International Society of Communication Specialists. Carlton Martin gave back as a mentor to a variety of early stage companies and volunteers with charity, namely Trailblazer Tandem Cycling Club of the Visually Impaired and Toronto Skiing Hawks, which takes the visually impaired downhill ski in the winter. Yes, he does at least 5 charity rides a year, which included Ride Conquer Cancer, Cycle for Sight, Blaze the Sun, Kailash Children Center, and the Bike for the Brain Cows. He resides in, in Innisfil, Ontario, and frequently travel to um, down the south. Martin is also proud father of 3 successful grown-up children and number of grandchildren. I guess my number is outdated. So welcome, Martin. I finally got
Thank
to
you.
read it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, for that very kind introduction. And really, I wanted to also thank you and Young for your outstanding leadership at East and West. Without your leadership, none of these seminars and all of these programs, they would not be available. You guys do an immense amount of work in the background. And on behalf of the community that you serve, we're very grateful for all the work that you do. So thanks to Young and thanks to Frank for making this all possible. And good evening to everybody else who's on this Zoom call. Tonight is lecture 5 in a series of 12 lectures. And it goes over or the title of the lecture, I should say, is Financial Management and Funding for Immigrant Entrepreneurs in Canada. So this lecture will be, to some people, will be at a very basic information. To others, I think will be very helpful. And there is some advanced information that's also contained in the presentation. So I've tried to balance out between those of you who are already actively engaged in business and looking for some further advice, and those who are just starting, and even those who are just thinking about the possibility of maybe going into business or starting their own business. So I'm going to go through some of the opportunities, the differences that Canada has between the rest of the world in terms of its business setup and how you can best be an entrepreneur in Canada. So let me start by saying that there are many immigrant entrepreneurs that come from countries where banking, loans, and government funding work very differently than in Canada. So in the Canadian system, these are kind of the key features. Firstly, unlike most countries, it is a very, very highly regulated and very stable environment. Very highly regulated, very stable. There are very strong protections for business owners. And for the most part, the lending rules are very transparent. Having said that, they're very transparent, but very strict. And let me give you an example of what I mean. back in 2008, some of you may be aware, there was a huge financial crisis in the United States. Basically, what happened was the lending institutions found out that a very large number of people who had mortgages were very bad mortgages. And the banks started to not only call them in, but when they called them in, the price of homes plummeted. It went down literally about 50% in some areas like Florida and in Las Vegas. So there were certain areas affected by more, but they had a major crisis in that the because of all of these bad mortgages out there that the bank had given out, it finally came to fruition that they had to get rid of all of these, bad mortgages, and so the price of homes went down in half, and there was this huge crisis. And why was there a crisis? Because in the United States, at least at the time, what happened was lending money from the banks was more based on the asset than it was of the ability of the person to pay. So you might say there was a crisis in the United States in 2008, but interestingly enough, you might ask the question, well, there must have been the same crisis in Canada. And the answer is no, absolutely not. In fact, there was almost zero crisis in Canada, other than the fact that there were Canadians that had US properties, things like that. But for the most part, the industry and the financial industry was unaffected in Canada. Well, why? Because the difference in the United States was that when you went to take a loan on a home, they quite frankly couldn't care less about your credit history. They couldn't care less about, proving how much you make per year. All they really cared about was the value of the asset. So if you walked into a bank and said, hey, I want $1 million loan, they'd ask you, well, how much is your house worth? And you say, well, I bought it for $1 million. And typically the bank would turn around and say, well, you got $1 million house, you want $1 million loan? No problem. We'll give it to you because we can always get the house back, right? So they would loan up to 80, 90% of the value of the house and just about to anybody. So what happened is when they found out that all of these people had gone out and bought homes for large amounts of money, they gave them the money thinking, well, they can always take back the house. And then they realized the massive numbers of people that couldn't pay the monthly and how many people were behind in their payments. That's when they started calling in all the loans and they had the crisis, et cetera. And then what happened, of course, is a person who had very little money and very little income, who owned $1 million home, their house dropped in value to $500,000, but their mortgage was still $900,000 or $1 million. So what did those people do? They walked away from their houses. They just defaulted. So there was a real crisis there. In Canada, having said that, the difference in lending in Canada was that in Canada, they only lend based on your ability to pay the loan. So even though you went out and bought $1 million home, they almost don't care about the price of your home. What they care about is your credit rating. And what they care about in particular is you have to prove your ability to repay the loan. So as an example, somebody who deals in, sort of the black market money, they're money launderer people, they can't get a loan from an institution in Canada because they don't have the tax returns to be able to show that they make money. In the United States, they could. So basically up here in Canada, it was very much based, or it's still today, credit is very much based on your proof of income and your credit score. And it's very, very different from most of the rest of the world where they more or less base it on the asset. Now, I can say since 2008, the rules in the United States have changed quite sufficiently because of what happened. But in Canada, they've always been the same. And if anything, they're even stronger and tighter today. So all of this in a long-winded way to say your credit history and your earnings are almost everything in Canada in terms of establishing credit. Okay, so why does this matter? Is without a good credit history, banks may simply not lend you money. Government programs are available, but they also require proper documentation. And so suffice it to say that financial literacy in Canada is essential for long-term success. So having said all of that, the question is how do you build personal and business credit in Canada? And both are important, by the way. So how do you build it? Well, your credit history, your actual credit history affects your loan approvals, your credit card limits, your business financing, when you go to lease equipment, even when you go to rent a commercial space, your credit history becomes very, very important in terms of who the landlords will rent to. Okay. How do you build your credit? Okay. Well, this is, probably obvious, but it's worth saying. Firstly, you want to open a Canadian bank account, both personally and professionally, and you want to keep them separate. Okay. You want to get a secured credit card if you need one. And it's much more important. And this is, I'm just going to mention this little story, which you'll appreciate is kind of a fun story. There was a guy by the name of Frank Abagnale. Now, Frank Abagnale, if the name sounds familiar to you, it's because there was a movie about him called Catch Me If You Can. Frank was a thief from the age 16 to 21. He impersonated doctors. He impersonated airline pilots. He stole money and was a fraudulent individual for the first 5 years of his adult life from 16 to 21. He eventually got caught and served his time for a short period in jail. When the FBI in the United States realized how brilliant Frank was, they made a deal with him. They cut his sentence short, and he actually went to work for the FBI, and I think probably almost up until this day, still continued to work to help them with security and security fraud. And he went on to have, I think it was 3 kids. He led an outstanding and upstanding life, turned out to be a great asset to the world. And I had the pleasure of actually meeting him in Montreal, I think it was in the 90s or so, something like that, and actually was able to sit with him at a conference and have lunch with him. A fascinating individual. And if you haven't seen the movie, it's a fun movie to go see. It's called Catch Me If You Can. But basically, Frank did a lot of lectures later on, and of all the lectures that he did, and probably the best advice he ever gave me, and he gave me this not only for myself, but he said, if you ever have children, the one thing that you want to do is the first thing you want to do is get yourself and get your kids a credit card. And why do you want to do that as opposed to a debit card? Well, there's a fundamental difference because a lot of people come here, they get a bank card and they start using their debit card to say, hey, you know what? This way it comes directly out of my checking account. I can manage my cash, better. It's a mistake. It's a big mistake. In fact, you shouldn't use a debit card at all. And I'll tell you the principal reasons why. Number one, corporately or personally, a debit card has no insurance. So if, for argument's sake, there is some fraud, you are responsible for that fraud. Number two, in most cases, your debit card does not affect your credit rating. So even though you may be spending a lot of money, et cetera, unless the rules have changed dramatically, this is the way they were up to now, it really has little to no effect on your credit. Conversely, if you have a credit card, every transaction you make goes towards your credit. So if you buy something and you pay it off on time, your credit rating goes up. The same principle applies with insurance, is that credit cards are fully insurable, meaning that if there is fraud on your card, it's the bank's responsibility to chase down the fraud and you get a credit on your card. So very important is that if you are using transaction cards, is make sure wherever possible you use your credit card and, quite frankly, completely limit the use of any debit card. That's just a little thing that a lot of you know, but for the few on here who might not know, it's a really important rule. The other thing that you should obviously try to do is pay your bills on time, use your credit card, make sure you pay your phone bills, your utility bills. Another thing is don't use your credit card to loan money. And right now I'm mentoring a young man born in the United States, grew up here, worked for a large company. You would think he would know better, but I'm right now trying to desperately help him switch his loans. And he is running a small business, does about $500,000 a year. And he still has this huge amount of debt to the credit card companies because that's how he started his company. He loaned money, he maxed out his credit cards. He's paying interest rates of 21%, 24% instead of loaning money from the bank where it could have been at, let's say, 4 or 5 or 6%. So if you use your credit card and max them out to loan money, you end up paying very high rates And also, worse than that, it creates bad credit, and it just ends up being this revolving cycle that you can't get out of. So you got to get those credit cards paid off, get proper credit from the bank, and make sure that that's the route that you go. You obviously, over a period of time, you want to also, reduce your debt. You want to avoid the overuse of a credit. You don't want to use it to the point where it's going to get you into trouble either. And lastly, just to repeat to you, you really should separate your personal and your business finance, both in terms of credit cards and all expenditure, even in terms of bank accounts and checks, et cetera, if you still use those. Okay. So let's move on a little bit to understanding the business finance basics. And this is for more or less those who are just starting out their business, is understand that cash flow is the lifeblood of your business. It really is the ability for you to track your money moving in and out. And what you really want to have as best you can, obviously, is a positive cash flow, which meaning you got more money coming in than you have going out. And some people use the word bootstrapping, but the bottom line is it's starting and running a business based on cash flow, always ensuring that you have more coming in the door than going out. If you get into a negative cash flow, this has caused many businesses to close. And even if they're profitable, like you can still have a very profitable business, but you get yourself into a negative cash flow. You could be making a whole bunch of money based on your revenue minus your expenses, but then all of a sudden you go out and instead of leasing equipment, you go out and buy this, big piece of equipment, or you go out and pay rent for 6 months in advance to get a better rate. So you put too much cash out, and even though you're profitable, you can still go out of business. So you want to keep a positive cash flow. Very, very important. Don't overspend. Make sure you always have, money in the bank as best you can. So when you start into your business, you are going to have startup costs. Examples of that are going to be things like equipment, rent, lease, inventory. You have licensing. You could have website marketing costs. So those are just examples of some of the startup costs. And then you're going to have operating costs. Operating costs are typically, and these are ongoing costs, things like payroll, supplies, utilities, insurance, taxes, legal, accounting, all those type of things. So let's talk a little bit about, your profit margin, which is we've referred to earlier, which is your selling price, minus your costs. Businesses with very low margins are very vulnerable. So you should try to be focused on businesses with predictable, stable margins. So some people will say, gee, I'm going to make it up on quantity. I'm going to sell I'm only going to make a penny on these things, but I'm going to sell so many of them. When you get into a situation where your revenue, like your income from a certain product or service, matches very, very close to your expense for that service. In other words, you're selling something for $10 and it's costing you $9.70 or $9.80. You can sit there and say, yeah, you might sell a lot of them, but a slight shift in things like your supply, where all of a sudden the supplier raises your price by even 15 or 20 or 30 cents, can wipe your profit margin out right away. So what you want to try to find is things that have a very stable profit margin, where you've got contracts with your suppliers for a period of a year. Think of the airline industry as an example. You're charging $500 for somebody to fly from Toronto to Chicago, and the price you paid for gas yesterday has just doubled the next day. And yet you've already sold the ticket, and now all of a sudden you've got to cover, twice the gas costs. So you would be very smart. And this is actually a good story about Southwest Airlines. One of the ways that they were so successful in their early days is they were the only airline that actually negotiated a 3-year fixed price with one of the gas companies. So where everyone else's gas was going up, all the other airlines, they were in a fixed price contract for 3 years, and they ended up being very successful in being able to undercut the other companies. So think about something that has a good profit margin and that has a very stable, repeatable margin based on contracts with suppliers and that type of thing. So pricing strategies for the Canadian market. there's a few different ways of pricing products. One of them is cost plus, which is you just take your costs and add 20%, you make a percentage markup. That's a very old school way of doing things. It's not a way that I would recommend, but it's a way a lot of people think, it's easiest to run their business by just saying, well, let's just mark everything up by 50% or 100%, and that's the way we'll run our business. It's not the best way. What I more or less suggest and advise to you is to look at something called value-based pricing, and that's charging based on the value to the customer. As an example of this, think of a hotel room, right? If we were doing cost plus, we would say, okay, well, to maintain this whole hotel room costs us $75 every night. That includes cleaning, the lease, the mortgage, all of the stuff that we have on the hotel. And so we're going to charge 100% markup. We're going to charge $150 every night. Well, that's great, excepting as we all know, very few people stay in hotels on Sunday night, but a lot of people stay in hotels on Saturday night, right? So you're going to be very empty a lot of the time. So in value-based pricing, it's more based on the demand of the customer than it is basically on this sort of cost plus. So, why does a hotel room on a Saturday night cost $450, but on a Sunday night, the same room, same beds, same costs $150? Well, that's because of the demand of the people. So look very, very carefully, and what you want to create is a value proposition for the customer so that you're selling based on the value to them. And that's another very important thing, not so much to do with this topic tonight. Hopefully it'll come up in one of our other lectures. But you really want to sell people based on the experience. It's not we're the cheapest, we're the fastest, all of that's good, but it really is what a customer wants to understand is what will they feel like after they've purchased the product from you. You want to share the experience that they're going to have. That's the most important thing. So, by staying at our hotel, you're going to feel so peaceful and so restful. And you show pictures of them lying out by the pool or finally at peace after a very hectic day. So you want to share the experience that they're going to have, not just sell things based on price or what your competition is charging. Sell the experience. Okay. What are Canadian customer expectations? Canadians in general are quite different from other consumers. And the reason I also mention this is you may have noticed over the years, any of you that have done research on US companies coming to Canada, a vast amount, a crazy amount of US companies that bring their franchises or their businesses into Canada fail, like a crazy amount. You sit there and think, well, what's the difference between a US citizen and a Canadian citizen? Basically, the makeup's a lot the same. We all like hamburgers. We all eat at fast food restaurants. We all get car washes, right? So if you went into Toronto, went to Chicago, you'd sit there and think, gee, the consumer looks awfully familiar. They do the same things. But there are very distinct differences. And you really need to understand the Canadian consumer is quite a bit different. Just ask Target that opens something like 150 stores and lost, I don't know, like 40 or 50 billion, I don't know what the number was, but some crazy amount of billions of dollars. Open 150 stores one year and like a year later close them all, right? So they got a very rude awakening to the Canadian market. And there's lots and lots of stories of US, and this is where you would think, US, Canada is so similar. Now, if you look at China or you look at other parts of the world, Hong Kong, wherever it might be, and you say, oh yeah, there's differences, but just the complexity between a US and Canada customer, you can imagine what it would be if you're running a business in Spain or France and you bring it here, the complexities would be all that much greater. So what does the Canadian customer expect? First and foremost, they expect fair and very transparent pricing. They don't want to find out when they go in that, you brought me into the store. You did what's called, it's actually illegal now. It wasn't in the years. This was in the automotive industry. It was called bait and switch, where you show a car at, $29,000, but when you show up, that car, we don't have it anymore, right? So now that's illegal in Canada, but at one point it wasn't. And it's called bait and switch, just so you know, it's actual legal term. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to lie to customers. You don't want to bring them in and say, "Oh, you've got this car at $29,000," and then you walk in, and by the time they're finished with you, that car is $39,000 or $45,000. Canadians in particular find that very offensive. So you want fair and transparent pricing. Tell them what they're going to pay. Be honest about it. Be transparent. They do like discounts. They do like to, get like clear promotional values or events. So yeah, discounts are a great thing. Canadians are very big on that. I think that's probably a universal thing. But they really like quality and service over the cheapest price. So I'm going to repeat that again because basically business is based on price, quality, service. That's the triangular, fundamental thing you learn in Business School 101, price, quality, service. And interestingly enough, that the fundamental difference with a Canadian is that they are more inclined to buy based on quality and service over the cheapest price. So you don't necessarily, in fact, I would say this statement to you, you probably don't want to compete on price in Canada. First of all, it's a hard game to play, very easy to lose at. But what you really want to show is quality and service. People buy from people if they trust you, if you're transparent, provide good quality and good service. The chances are you're going to be much more successful in Canada than in a lot of the other countries around the world. So let's now move into things like funding options for immigrant entrepreneurs. There's a variety of different funding options, and this, I guess, is where the meat of tonight's presentation gets into and where this might be the most helpful information. The other stuff was just introductory and more basic, and I'm sure most of you on this call are already aware of most of it. But for those who aren't, hopefully you found some nuggets in there that might help you. Let's get into the funding part of it. Let's first talk about government funding programs. So under government funding programs, there is something called Futurepreneur Canada. Futurepreneur Canada. It's just like entrepreneur, only it's Futurepreneur Canada. All right. They've been around since 1996, and they're the only national nonprofit organization that provides young aspiring entrepreneurs across Canada with loan financing, mentorship, and also resources that you might need to start or buy a business. There are some caveats to this. Typically, they only do small loans, up to $20,000. And you do have to be within a certain age category, typically between the ages of 18 to 39. So you might have to have one of your kids help you out with this into the business. But the good news is that you don't have to have any Canadian credit history. And it usually includes a 2-year mentorship program. So again, you can just go online, look them up, and go through it. And they could be a very, very good resource for you in building your business if you're starting out. The second, which probably a lot of you know, this won't be news to too many, is called BDC, which stands for the Business Development Bank of Canada. Now, I have mixed emotions about them. I've had my clients or my students who I mentor, I've had them involved with BDC. They've had good experiences, bad experiences, everything in between. But basically what they're set up to do is to provide loans for new and growing business. They probably will be a bit more flexible than traditional banks. They won't have as strict rules sometimes as the banks. I see Frank has already put the link into the chat room for Futurepreneur. So they have more flexible than traditional banks, and they do have really good programs for newcomers. So if you go to BDC, look at their programs for newcomers, and I think you'll find it could be a very advantageous place for you to go. So that's the second place. The third is you could apply for grants. There used to be something called the Canada Digital Adoption Program, CDAP. It was also run by BDC, or sorry, yeah, by BDC. Although this program, as I understand, is no longer available, but there could be other programs out there. You always have to look under grants, grants and subsidies for newcomers. There's always stuff coming up. So although this one's no longer available, take a look. Oh, I just see say David just mentioned he's on this call that he signed up for Futurepreneur and he got approved with a mentor, which is exciting. That's great news. So there you go. David's just an example of someone on this call tonight who did use that. So obviously that's very helpful and useful information for you to know. So there are also things such as, so I was saying the CDAP program is no longer available, but there are other programs out there that could be of some help. There are also quite a number of provincial, rather than Canada-wide, there are provincial small business grants as well. Usually they're very targeted, right, to industries and things like that. But the good news is most of them are non-repayable funding for initiatives like hiring or digital adaptation, expansion of your company, specific programs tailored by each province, as an example, to meet with local economic goals. Um, and they can also be, as I mentioned earlier, industry specific grants, like for tech or agriculture or green energy, that type of thing. So, depending on what you're involved with, look for the provincial small business grants as well. Um, another few programs out there, if you're already in business, that you can look at possibly. One is called SHRED, which is SHRED, and you can also look this up online. The other one's called IRAP, which is IRAP, and another one called CAN Export, which is basically helps you to sort of export your business if you're selling into the US. They provide some funding for that as well. All of these three programs are more or less once you've started your business. The neat thing about these type of programs is that you can go and look for a broker. Okay. And these brokers typically will do all of the documentation for you. If you're running a business and, typically they'll be soliciting you anyways, like you'll get these emails. Hey, are you using Shred in your business? Would you like to use IRAP? And usually they charge a percentage of their success. So as an example, if someone gets you $80,000 worth of Shred in your business, typically they'll want anywhere from 10 to 15% as a fee. So you get the $80,000, you pay them 8 or $12,000, and you keep the rest for the use of this program into your business. Now, I will say to you, in these programs, there is a lot of documentation involved. There's a lot of rules, a lot of regulations. So at least for me, and I used all of these programs, at least for me, it was much cheaper to have a broker do it for me than it was for myself. And there's a lot of them out there. If for any reason any of you are looking for a broker for this, I can give you a couple of names that I have. Just email me or text me, and I'm happy to provide you with my contacts. Okay. So that's another thing you can use once you get your business going. Let's talk a little bit now about bank loans. A really, really good place for you to go and get your money. Probably the cheapest money you're going to find is through the banks, which I said earlier. It's very regulated, but very transparent. What banks are looking for is, yeah, they're looking for your ability to repay your loan. So you do have to have kind of the income from somewhere that shows that, hey, you're going to loan money from us. Do you have the ability to repay it? Now, in some cases, especially on the business side of the banks, there are exceptions to those rules. If you can make a compelling story, and we'll talk a little bit about that momentarily, but obviously a really solid, good business plan, along with your past experience, a good story, all of those types of things can also be very, very beneficial for you going into a bank. Traditional banks will require good credit. We've talked enough about that. So good credit is really, really, really important, and you can get it really, really easy. Just, pay your bills on time, use a credit card, do not use a debit card, and you should be able to establish a pretty good credit pretty quickly in today's world. It's very, very, a very regulated industry. There's two companies really in Canada. I think it's the Creditel and Trans, whatever their name is the other one in Canada. There's really only two companies in financial credit, sorry, the credit card companies in Canada. When I say credit card, I mean credit companies. These are the people responsible for monitoring your credit. And there are only two, and the banks kind of use one or both, but they are the ones that basically look after your credit score. So get good credit, walk in with a really solid, business plan, as we've talked about, and have a compelling case with really good financial projections. Show your homework. How many units, how much are you going to sell? Who are you selling to? What's the market you're going to? A really strong mission statement. Why are you doing this to begin with? A really strong vision statement. Where do you expect to be 5 years from now? What's your vision of your company in 5 years? And then a very credible story about how you feel you're going to get your customers, how many customers you're going to get, how much you're going to charge them, what your costs are going to be, so they can look at this and say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense to us. And the chances are, over a period of time, not only can you get a loan, but as you build a relationship with the bank, obviously, you'll be able to get more money and increase your loan. And there's loans come in different ways. They come in lines of credit where they just set up a certain amount of money and you can basically use that. You only pay for the money you use. So you take money out, you use it, you make money, you put money back in. So you can use this revolving line of credit where you go back and forth and just use what you need up to a maximum amount, and they will assign you an interest rate to that loan as well. I think today the prime lending rate is around 4.45%. So you can see how favorable some of these loan amounts are. Usually for business, it depends on who you are. If you're, a big player, you might be able to get prime or even a little under prime. But for the average person out there, they're going to get prime plus one, or for a business, prime plus two or three, that type of thing. Those are the type of numbers that you'll get. There are we call in the industry micro loans, smaller loans for 1,000 to 10,000. A lot of these online companies are starting up now where they'll, based on very little information from you, they'll check you out through TransUnion and the other credit companies and the banks. They'll check you out and sometimes give you instant loans for 5 or 10,000. Be very careful with those. Check very carefully what those interest rates are, how much you're paying, and what the other stipulations are. So be very, very careful to make sure that they're being transparent and that you're not getting messed around. All right. There are also, believe it or not, there are community organizations out there. Again, you have to go online that help out small business, particularly newcomers. So look at your community organizations. Some of those might be offering smaller loans. And these smaller loans are really, really good for early stage business, especially if you have limited credit. The other type of thing that you can do is private funding. There are things called angel investors, and those are basically more or less people who just are good people that want to help you out and usually know you through an acquaintance of some kind. They could be family, they could be friends. It's that type of person. It's a friend of a friend kind of thing that, sort of vouches for you and says, hey, this person's a really good person. It could be a father, a mother, a brother, sister, could be that type of thing. Usually it's somebody who's close to you, who's willing to loan you money. But even with them, make sure that you have a solid written agreement to avoid any relationship conflicts. The last thing you want to do is spoil or soil your relationship with a family member because the things were not understood and they weren't written out. The second is partnership investments. Is you're going into a business. You could probably go online, look at who else is in your business. Sometimes you think, oh, they're foe, but sometimes they actually could be friend. So get to know who the competition is sometimes. Sometimes you could actually convince somebody who's sort of in the business, maybe they're struggling a little bit, but maybe they've got some money behind them. Maybe you could go into a partnership with them and they could possibly provide the funding for you necessary. And they might even have things like they already have an administrator. They already have a presence online. In other words, they already have a premise that they lease. So you could potentially, a good example of this would be is if somebody had was in, let's say you are a specialist for, let's say, for women's hair coloring or something along those lines, and you really just didn't want to work inside a salon, you really wanted to have your own business, right? So what you could do is potentially approach a salon instead of saying, oh, you know what, I want to work for you. Maybe what you could do is approach them and say, look, I want to kind of be in partnership with you. I want to sort of rent a chair from you for $500 or $1,000 a month. I'll come in, you got all the overhead covered. I'll just pay you $500 a month. And then whatever business I bring in, I'll pay you 20% or 50% of it. I'll pay to you and I'll keep the other 50%. And so you can make a deal to become more like a partner than an employee of this person, and move into that business till you get enough of a following where eventually you could potentially move out and start your own shop. But at least at that point, you have money in the bank to do so. So that's just an example of the type of way that this would apply. So I've mentioned, oh, and I think, yes, the other, I mentioned family and friends. Okay, so there are also things like things such like VCs, which are venture capitalists, and PEs, which are private equity companies. Those are going to be companies you're not going to go to in your startup stages. Those are companies that you'll go to. I'm just trying to tell you the other terms that you'll hear. So VCs and PEs are out there with big money. They can give you 100 million, they can give you $10 million. But that's only after you have an incredibly great business going that has this super high-end potential for growth, and you have companies like Apple looking to buy you, that type of thing. So you can find VCs and PEs, but only if you have a very compelling story. Where, as an example, I started my business, I did $1 million in my first year, I did 10 million the next year, I'm now doing 112 million. Well, you're going to get the interest of VCs and PEs to come and look at your company at that point, but they're certainly not going to be interested if you're just starting out and have no proof of success as of yet. So let's talk a little bit now about self-funding. The final way in which you can find funding. Self-funding is pretty obvious, right? You can use your own savings. There's nothing that demonstrates your commitment to your company than using your own savings. It's actually a very compelling argument when you go into a bank to say that, hey, I invested 15,000 of my own money. I'm asking you to invest 15,000 as well. In the old days in Canada, we used to say that's putting your money in front of your mouth, right? So it's putting, or another expression is putting skin into the game, right? You'll hear those expressions. They're both they're North American expressions, and what that really means is I'm willing to put my own savings into this in the interest of trying to find other investors, or sometimes that's the only money that I can put into the business. So you might want to think about saving up enough money to start your business. Remember, you always, in starting out these smaller businesses, you want to start small. Probably, make sure you have a very strong online presence. Selling online means that you can work from home. So there's some key advantages there. And instead of going out and buying equipment, or even for that matter, leasing equipment, look at the potential of just renting equipment. It's the cheapest and easiest way to get into a business, and probably the smartest way is just go ahead and rent what you need rather than buy the equipment, which could be very expensive. So the terminology I used before was bootstrapping, which is really the examples I've used. So bootstrapping is a terminology that we use in Canada for really using your own savings, starting small, starting online, renting instead of buying equipment. We put that all into a bundling, and the terminology we use in North America is called bootstrapping, which really means you're just going day by day, using your own money and not using anybody else's to start your business. Okay. So how to prepare for funding applications, right? Lenders and investors will always ask the following questions. Number one, do you have a business plan, right? They will want, as I mentioned earlier, financial forecasts. They will want a startup budget. They will want cash flow projections. So these are the typical things that if you're going to go to a bank in particular, these are the things you're going to want to have. But quite frankly, no matter who loans you money, if they know what they're doing, they're going to want to ask these questions. Even if it's family, these are the same type of questions that they should be asking. The other questions they're going to ask you is, and again, I alluded to this earlier, is they're going to say, what is your ability? How can you repay the loan? So you've got to show revenue potential. You've got to show maybe you have contract agreements already in place. But another thing is, as part of the bootstrapping, go out there and get contracts. If you're in the business of doing snow plowing, right? And this is a really good example. If you're in the business of doing snow plowing in the winter, and let's say you're doing mowing the lawns in the summer, and you create this summer winter business, and you have, 30 contracts for snow plowing and 32 contracts for cutting people's grass in the summer, and you could go to the bank and say, I already have these signed contracts, and I already have, $150,000 worth of business guaranteed to me. They're signed contracts with deposits. That's going to help you a lot in terms of getting any kind of loan from, whether it's an institution or whether it's an angel investor or whether it's family friend. That's going to help a lot, is to have contract agreements. So that's a very important point. It's one of the nuggets of tonight's presentation is, if you're in a type of business where you can get contracts and you can get the contracts before you spend any money, it's a really easy way to get some funding. The other thing is to get pre-orders, if possible, on any of your products or services. Again, same type of thing, like going out and getting the contracts, or if you're able to go out and get pre-orders. And there's a lot of websites committed to that, where they put up a concept of a product and people will actually invest in that ahead of time. So you're probably all familiar with these websites, and you could go to them, put up your product or service, and get funded through some of the online sites that offer that, put your idea up and then, ask for funding, and hopefully people will search you out and fund your project. So that can be done before you even finished manufacturing your product. So let's go on a little bit to, what personal investments, have you made? So the banks prefers entrepreneurs who contribute some of their own money. So again, it's going back to the same point we made before, is the best possible way to show somebody your confidence in your business plan, your forecast, etc., is either with contracts. Obviously, that's the best way. Or at least if you're going to do some forecasting, it's almost essential that you're prepared to put some money into your own business. And by showing that, it really makes a statement to whoever your lenders will be. Okay? So let's talk a little bit at the very end here about some of the mistakes that, financial mistakes that new immigrants or new entrepreneurs often make. So we talked again about this earlier, is setting prices too low. Remember, I would not go into a business where price is the predominant factor. I would really look at, quality and service. If you set your prices too low and your margins are too low, you're too susceptible to just a small change in either the amount of, from your supplier, or you have to drop your revenue because it's a little too high. Just a very small amount in those can make the difference between making a lot of money and turn that into losing a lot of money. The other thing that I recommend is, do not mix your personal and business money. I've seen this just so many times, even with some of the ones that I'm mentoring right now, where everything is in one account. It's merged together. Really go out of your way to make sure that you separate your personal and your business money. That's related to credit cards, to bank accounts, to cash. Just make sure that you keep separate, because eventually you're going to have accounting for both, and it just creates a nightmare, especially for your accountant, if they are mixed together. The other mistake I've seen is people who don't do cash flow planning. Cash flow planning is very important because no matter how profitable your business is, if you don't have cash, if you don't have that ability to pay for something, you could run into some significant issues very early in your startup. The other thing I mentioned is mistakes that I've seen is where people hire staff too early. They start out, things start going good. You open a bakery shop, you're just making ends meet. You're making enough money to pay the rent, stuff like that. And you decide, oh, you know what? I'm going to hire somebody. Then all of a sudden, because the profit margin causes a huge drop, is they get themselves into trouble because, yeah, it's nice to have staff and it's nice I don't have to go to work, but at the same time, now all of a sudden you go from a break-even situation into a loss situation. Okay. So you want to be very, very careful about hiring staff too early. You're really, really, I'm going to say it to you this way. Um, I really think you need to know, and I've said this repeatedly in so many of the lectures, you need to go in, and if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to understand being an entrepreneur is not a 9 to 5 job. It is, 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week, especially when you're starting out. There's some heavy lifting to do. And the more you can do in that, and the more money you can save from hiring staff at the very beginning, the better off you'll be. Make sure you're on solid ground, solid financial ground, and solid footing before you hire your first staff. The other thing that I've seen, again, repeatedly, is where people, they start a restaurant and they go out and buy all their equipment. They spend, $50,000, $60,000, and they buy all their ovens and their special pizza makers and everything else, and they get themselves into a lot of trouble because they just can't make the money fast enough to pay off the loans, etc. So it's just so much better in the beginning if you can rent or lease. Well, lease is okay, but even better is if you can rent the equipment right at the very beginning. So focus on that. So these mistakes can cause a business to fail, even when there's strong demand. So be very careful about that. So I think for the most part, I'll just sum up by saying I thank you very much for your indulgence in your time tonight. I know these lectures can be very long sometimes and very repetitive. So I appreciate you hanging in there till the end, and we'll hopefully have some good discussion here. But the key takeaways from this lecture are: build your credit early. It affects everything. Again, on the credit side, use your credit cards, loan money from the bank if you can, low interest rates. Don't use your credit card for loans. So build your credit early and keep a high credit score. It will really be a very effective tool for you all throughout your business career. It has been for me. Understand cash flow, profit, and pricing. Go out of your way to understand what cash flow is, what the profitability is, and what the pricing is going to be, to make sure that you have an effective product at an effective price, but focus on the quality of your service. And will go a lot further than price will in this marketplace. Remember that Canada, and there's a key point, Canada has excellent funding options for new immigrants in a whole variety of ways. That's why I spent a lot of time on that tonight. I wouldn't normally do this if I was doing this lecture just to the average person that grew up here, right? They really have some good funding options for new immigrants in particular. Canada is a great place for that. They're very cognizant that the makeup of Canada in terms of our population is consistently a lot of new immigrants. And as such, they really cater a lot of the funding programs towards them. So take advantage of that. Start small, manage money wisely, and grow strategically. A clear business plan, okay, a very clear business plan will increase your success dramatically. And with that, those are basically the summary points of tonight's lecture. I'll conclude. I thank you again for your time and energy. I thank Frank and Young for their absolute commitment to East and West and everything that they do to make these programs successful. I hope tonight's been, even if you got one thing out of tonight, it's been worthwhile. If you haven't, My apologies, but if you did get one or two things out of tonight, I'm tickled pink. I always say if you can get one nugget out of a session, it's a great session. So hopefully, if you got one or more, fantastic. And at this point, again, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions. Over to you, Frank.
Thank you. If I have any question, you can just directly unmute yourself to ask, or you can type in chat box. Martin, I have a question on the corporate tax rate. So traditionally, Canada is boasting to can boast we have lowest corporate tax rate in G7. Now seems European countries and the US, especially um, uh, last term of Trump, they lowered corporate tax. Now it's almost like same for all Western countries. Is that so? Any um,
So in the G7, it does vary. I would say that they're in relative terms, relatively close. I think Canada is now higher than lower, on a comparative basis. I would say it's not necessarily, just, if you look as an example, this is actually a good example. I mean, in Canada, an entrepreneur, by the time you're finished, especially if you're in the highest bracket and all, you could be up to 54%. So as an example, conversely to that, like if you were in the US, particularly in a state like Florida, where I am actually, broadcasting tonight from, that rate could be almost half that. There is no corporate income tax in the state of Florida, but obviously there is federal tax, right? And there's some other county taxes and things like that. But typically, one of the things that you want to look for, at least I would want to look for as an entrepreneur, is where is the best place to start your business? And Canada right now, and I'll just be very candid and very sincere. Um, I would say right now, as an entrepreneur, it is one to me. It's too high, and I especially if you're successful, and I would say. But having said that, so I'm going to say Canada is too high. I'm going to say that there are certain states in the United States where you can incorporate. And remember, you can still be a Canadian running a business in Canada, and you can do it in a variety of ways. You can be in Canada, not ever step into the United States, just be in Canada and run a business in the United States. It's nothing, you can register it. It can be Canadian owned. You pay your taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the key advantages is that, running a company in the US in certain states is literally can be half the cost of running in Canada. So there's some distinct advantages. The other thing that you can do, if you're an entrepreneur in Canada, is you could still stay as a Canadian, right? You still be a Canadian citizen, still have your OHIP, et cetera. But you could do what's called an E2, which would be your ability with an investment of approximately a minimum of $100,000. You could set up a business in the US. You can run it down here. Immigration wise, you could be here 100% of the time, not so much tax wise. From a tax perspective, only up to really 6 months. So there's it really requires a lot of planning, a lot of strategy. This is a session for another night. This is a much more advanced session.
Yeah.
It's really not part of this course, but you could technically, do an E2, have a business down here. Immigration wise, the U.S. will say, yeah, you can be here every day of the week. You can stay here, no problem with us. But you will have a problem with the tax department if you're here more than 6 months a year, and they will want you to pay taxes on your global income. However, there is reciprocity between Canada and the U.S. So whatever you pay down here, you end up doing taxes in both countries. You end up doing taxes in Canada and taxes in the US. And what's supposed to happen theoretically is because of the reciprocity, wherever you pay your taxes, you get that back, somewhere else. And it's supposed to end up working out the same. I can tell you by historically, it doesn't quite. You will pay a bit more, but still it's much more advantageous. Now, having said all of that, the real question is beyond business and beyond money. And the folks on this call know this way better than most people in the world. There is something to be said for living in Canada versus living in the US. And that depends very much, and we're not going to have this conversation tonight, but that does depend very much on your political views, and and your cultural views and where you feel you're more comfortable. A lot of people will say, I'm much more comfortable living in the US. The difference in the US and Canada is US is much more based on patriotism. Canada is much more based on multiculturalism, if you will. And so there's a very, very big difference between a US person and a Canadian person, even though we look and smell and taste all the same. There's a really big difference. So if you come to the US and you really like it here and you love the flavor of the people, this could be a great place to run a business and live, right? If on the other hand, you are in Canada and you love the idea of the incredible nature of the vast array of multiculturalism and the culture of Canada and what we have to offer as a country, you might love Canada and hate the US. So I think it takes more than just a business decision here. Where do you want to raise your family? Where do you want your kids to raise their family? Okay. So these are the type of questions. So it's a multifaceted answer. And I'm sorry to be long-winded, but I've been through this myself and I could spend hours talking about this. I'm going to stop right now just to tell you it's a multifaceted answer. I would say that if you're looking strictly from a tax perspective, that I would look to certain states in the US to consider incorporating here and working with a really, really good accountant and lawyer in Canada that can give you the best tax advantages by still being a Canadian, still maybe keeping your Canadian citizenship, but having a US presence, maybe for the purposes of trying to lower your taxes. There are ways in which you can do that.
Thank
I don't know
you.
if that answers your question, but hopefully it
Yeah,
does.
thank you. It's important question for a lot of business people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big consideration. By the way, there are a lot of free seminars out there that are put on very consistently. Again, if you want any of these, or if you're not getting them through your email, just you can just email me or text me, and I'll be happy to forward on a few of those. They run seminars on best tax advantages and estate planning. I get all kinds of them, and these are free seminars, and some of them actually are very, very helpful in terms of helping you make your decisions. And a lot of them will offer up to a half an hour free consultation as well. So I would invest the time. As an example, I would go on to an E2 seminar, listen to it. These are these are Canadian companies that work with, Canadians who do business in Canada, but also you get to them just the fact that they're also selling the E2 services. So these are people that can help you in Canada as well, but they can also help you with, if you're thinking about doing anything in the States, they can help you with the E2s, and then they can answer in a half an hour. They can answer all your questions about, gee, should I set up in the US or am I better off staying here? If I do set up in the US, should I actually move there? Should I stay here? How long can I stay there? And they can answer a lot of the questions. I can probably now answer most of them, but they can be very helpful in terms of your determining, especially on tax advantages. The nice thing about some of these companies is they not only have lawyers, they also have accountants sitting side by side in the same firm and within departments where estate planning, wills and trusts, and business those departments sit beside each other. So imagine having, business, taxation, wills and estates, wills and trusts, estate planning, and lawyers and accountants in both of these sitting kind of in a cluster together. So these guys pretty much, I say guys, I mean, men and women. I use that pluralistically. These people can give you a pretty good overall as to what you want to do in terms of trusts, estates, US versus Canada, overseas. They can give you some really good advice, and you can usually get free lecture, half-hour consultation. And again, if you're not getting those, text me and I'll send you a link to one of them, and just accept the invite and you can go join them and get some free advice from them as well. Other questions? Got to be some other questions out there.
Yeah, I've got a question. I'm Jie.
Okay. Hi, G.
Hi, Martin. Thank you very much for another very informative workshop. Yeah, so since last one, we had a discussion in November, and I wanted to catch up with you on the some progress and haven't have time, but it's great to see you again, and thank you for Linka and Frank to organize this, and it's really nice to see you and hear learn from you again. And my question is I when is the best time to ask for a loan or apply for different fundings? So I think so let me elaborate on this a little bit because like
So
for
you're asking more or less when is the best time to do that?
yeah, so in the sense that I think I can say probably I have a client that so we are developing some system for the client. So and we haven't quite figured out the whole workflow yet. So we are kind of busy in the spending time on figuring out the first client. And it's not well as because this is a kind of client, we have a lot of discussion and we have back and forth and we have but we start to build trust. And so my question about loans and funding is it takes time and it takes, especially for fundings, like different forms, like I can easily Google and get 10 different ones and but each of them they have different questions and they request if you get in, then it's like 3 months accelerator and so like and then those could be the time that we spend on developing the product or getting another sales. And in terms of the loans, there's thing like the consideration about interest and writing up the business plan that might not be useful in 2 months. And so
Yeah.
those kind of consideration, how would you weigh in that?
So I would say to you that don't even look at doing a submission without at least having a business plan in place. So to all of you, before you even look at these grants or anything else, have a very solid business plan in place because the chances are a lot of the questions they're going to ask you will be answered within your business plan. So at least you have a quick reference and referral. You don't have to rethink this all the time. So the very first thing is to have a business plan. Second thing is obviously if you are able to have any contracts ahead of time, anything that shows where anything you can show to that foundation that you are have that potential of being successful. Anything like that, to have that in hand is also very helpful. But I would answer you by saying this, there's no particularly perfect time or great time. Like now is as good as any, is usually my answer. And I would say to you, it also depends on the loan. Interestingly enough, and you raised a really, really good point, G, is um, unfortunately, a lot of these efforts to apply for a grant, that type of thing, they require often quite a bit of time. The reason they do is they don't want to get in 1,000 grants that are simply your name, address, and phone number, right? What they want is they purposely make them sometimes very long because they don't want to get 1,000. They only want to get 100 or 50 of them. They want people to show that they're serious, and that means filling out a lot of information, right? So the age-old problem is how much time do you spend on doing all of these grants when you're trying to build your business? And being an entrepreneur, and that's why I say it's 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's like you've just got to be prepared to do everything and be everybody. It's like, well, yeah, well, when do I sell my business? Well, you do your sales from 9 to 5. And then from 5 to 9 at night, you figure out how to put the kids to bed. And while you're putting one kid to bed, you're filling out your grant application with your other hand, right? And that's what being an entrepreneur is. It's you have to do so much with so little, with only so many hours in the day. And that's why I hate to say it, but the honesty is most drop out, most quit because the easiest thing to do is just throw in the towel. And the ones who win, and I go back to this word all the time, I think you've heard this from me a million times, G, is those who execute. And you've got to execute. You cannot take no for an answer. You just cannot take no. You need to execute. And if a grant needs to be done, you got to find that, whether it's Sunday at 10 o'clock at night, you got to find the time to do it. And so I would say there's no best time, but at a minimum, at least if you have a business plan done and it's pretty comprehensive, has all your information, has all your plans, has your profit margins, all these things built into it. At least when those questions are asked on those grant applications, you can answer most of it from one document. And so it helps a lot. It's almost like when you make a plane reservation and all of a sudden it comes to check-in. And when it comes to making the reservation, all they need is, oh, what's your name and what's your credit card number? Thanks, thanks for flying with Air Canada. Then all of a sudden it comes to check-in time, and you have to take an afternoon off to answer all the rest of the questions, right? It's crazy, but that's good sales, right? But you just get the money first and then ask the questions later. But it's the same with this. It's when you have everything built in. If you have templates, like even with an Air Canada, when you're filling it out, if you have something that remembers all your information from before and kind of fills it in for you. If you don't have that, at least if you have your frequent flyer number and you have your social insurance number or whatever else they need, or you have your passport number and you have your address, all of those kinds of things. If you actually have if you don't have an auto fill in, even if you have a template of a document, at least it has all that information that you can just pull up on the side. So you don't have to keep going back and looking for, where's my passport? Where's you're running around chasing yourself. You're just wasting a lot of time. So having that template, in this case, having that business plan where all the answers to all the questions are there and it's by your side. So when you're doing the grant application, you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel all the time, but you have something to fill in, would be a very, very good thing to have. I would say that some of these applications, particularly the one for newcomers, remember, they're looking for people who are newcomers. They're looking for people who are starting out. So do you want to go to those people when you've been here for 10 years and you've got a business that's doing $10 million? Probably not, because at that point, they're not looking for you. They're looking for you today, right? So it depends on the application a little bit, but I would say look at these grant applications, fill them out as painful as it is, pick the ones that you think you got the best chance at, just get them done. And that's what I would do. Last part of this story is there are bodies, organizations out there called associations, and those are groups of people that belong together for a common purpose, like doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, electricians. They all have their own association that gets together primarily for advocacy, but also for services and education, right? So these associations form, and it's kind of funny. These organizations also rely very heavily. They're not only grant givers, they sometimes give grants, but they also are grant receivers. And to tell you how competitive the marketplace is, in that profession years ago, where it used to be that, the administrator would just, there's only a few grants out there, the administrator would fill out the forms. There are actually, it's become a profession now called grant writing. And that's how sophisticated these grants have gotten now, where organizations will actually hire a grant writer to write the grant, right? And all they do, they spend 365 days of the year writing grants for the organization. And when I say writing grants, applying for grants. So they come into work, they look at the next grant available, fill out the application, hit the send button, go on to the next one, go home, get up in the morning, come back and do the same thing. And it actually is a full-time job. And having said that, my final comment on this would be, you may be able to, and I'm not sure yet, you could look at some of the outsourcing on this. You might be able to look up to see if you can find a professional grant writer that might, and I don't know if this exists, it'd be here's another business idea. It might be a great business. There might be a grant writer that would do your grant based similar to Shred where they would just take a percentage of the success, where they would take the risk with you to actually write the grant and maybe then just take a percentage of the risk. If you could find someone like that, find a grant writer. So maybe just look in chat or on Safari, wherever, and just type in, is there a grant writer? Can I find a grant writer that will work on, based on success, and just see what comes up. And you might find some people out there that will, be willing to sort of take you on without any costs, but just work on a percentage of success. Don't know if it exists, but it'd be worth, just an idea for you guys to try and see if you can find one. And if you can, maybe share with the rest of the group.
Martin,
Yes.
this is yeah. I have a question for you. Talking about the pricing, I'm always curious, how do you price your products? Like, can you give some example? Is there any recommendable, say, profit rate or margin when you price your products?
So I would answer by saying to be very, very careful running your business based on, looking at only price, profit margins. Be very careful. It's not the way I would recommend or mentor anyone today. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I would base everything based on the customer value proposition. And what I would work more on is figuring out, I've got this coffee cup here, and I want to charge, everyone else is charging $1.50. I want to charge $2.50. Then I have to look at that cup and say, what makes it worth $2.50? How can I make that cup worth $2.50? How can I make it stand out from the rest that everybody will pay a bit more for my cup as opposed to just buy on price? I will tell you that people that sell on price only, generally in Canada, do not last that long. But people who sell on quality and service tend to be around for a long, long time. If they continue to provide real quality and real service that's far and beyond the competition. I'll give you an example. Even when you look at Apple, right? You look at Apple, you're sitting there paying, I don't know what it is today, $1,000, $1,500 a phone, right? There are tons of phones out there that you can buy at $599 or $699 or $799. There's lots of phones out there. Why is everybody buying an Apple phone? They're not selling it on price at all. To some degree, you could make the argument, oh, yes, they are. They couldn't charge this. But what they're trying to do is they're really focused on quality and on service. They want to provide the best ecosystem that money will buy, and they want to provide a product that causes you absolutely no problem. When you drop it, it won't break. When you scratch it, it doesn't scratch. If it falls into the bathtub, it doesn't fall apart. That's what they keep working on, making it better and better and better, not dropping price, right? And what's the next product they're going to come out with? It will come out in September, is the foldable phone. How much will it sell for? My best guess in Canada, probably $2,000, $2,500. So you sit there and say, hey, I just want to buy a phone. Why are they going to have these massive sales of these foldable phones? They're going to have mass sales. They won't have enough quantity of them. They're going to be selling at $2,500 and they're going to sell like pancakes, right? So I would say to you, Young and others, is really don't focus on price, focus on the value proposition to your clients and saying, look, I really need to make a sufficient margin on this cup. I want to charge $2.50, not $1.50. Think about it. What is it that will make it more valuable? Well, one of the things I can look at is, why don't I add art, right? Why don't I hire a really, really good artist and create these incredible, pictures or some kind of pictures or cartoons that kids will want to have? Just something that makes it different. Maybe it's a cup that feels like, it's fine china, but when you drop it, it doesn't break. I don't know but finding things and innovating to make your product better quality and provide a better service, like you buy this, you buy the cheap cup, you can expect to receive it in 2 weeks. You buy the expensive cup, we'll have it at your door between 7 and 11 in the morning, right? Those types of things are the types of things that I'll be focused on in Canada because there's an old saying. This goes back to my father's generation, and the saying goes like this: price is forgotten long after quality is remembered. Price is forgotten long after quality is remembered. Young or others on this call, have you ever gone out and bought a jacket or a bicycle or something that, is just sort of way more than you can afford? Like you spent that extra $200 or $300 or whatever that number is, and you bought something and said, you know what, I really could have just gone with, even with a phone, I really could have just gone with the basic phone, but I went and got the one with the much better camera, right? And 2 weeks later, do you even remember that you spent that extra $300? And do you value your purchase? Yeah, because every time you take a picture of your toddler or your children or your grandparents, every time you take a picture and you look at that picture, you go, oh my God, the quality is so much better on this camera. Do you really care about that extra $300 at that point? So price is remembered long after quality is forgotten. So if you can come up with the quality of something and work on a very decent profit margin where you can make a living, do it comfortably, and even at the point where if the supplier goes up a little in price or you have to reduce your price a little bit, you still have enough of a margin to have a healthy profit. And at the same time, really focus on the customer value here, making sure that they're getting good quality and great service. They will stick with you a lot longer than somebody who's just given them a good price on something that breaks or something they really don't enjoy having or something they regret buying and always are going to think in the back of their head, I should have bought that camera. I should have bought that phone with the better camera, right? And so if you think that way, you'll understand that it's all about the value to the customer. And how do you sell the value? You sell it based on the experience, right? How will they feel once they've got that phone? Once I've got that phone, and can you imagine if I say, hey, Frank, once you buy this phone, forget about anything. Once you buy this phone, can you imagine how you're going to feel when you first look at this thing and you look at a picture of whether it's your cousins or your children or your grandparents? Can you imagine how you're going to feel looking at this HD quality picture that you can keep for the rest of your life? It'll be in digital format. It will, it'll always retain its value or its quality. Imagine how you're going to feel looking at this phone, looking at this quality of picture of your family after you buy it. It's the experience that you want to sell, right? It's making Frank feel like, my God, you're right. I can just imagine taking a picture. But if I buy that other phone, I'm going to feel like all the time I take the picture and my kid's hair is fuzzy and it's out of focus. How am I going to feel when I look at that picture, knowing that I could have spent a little bit more and gotten something a little bit better? So that's what you have to weigh out. It depends what business you're in. There are entrepreneurs that will definitely argue with me and say, you know what? If I can go and look at this pen right here, I got a pen here, and everyone's selling it at $1.50, and I can sell it at $1.45 and sell a huge quantity of them by undercutting price, I can make a fortune. And sometimes they do, by the way, but usually they're not here 5 or 10 years later to talk about it. Usually they go in, they make their score. And again, please take this in the way in which it's intended to be said. This is much more in line with what happens in China. It is because people do sell, businesses much more aggressive there, much more active, and people do tend to sell much more based on price and fast turnover. They get in, do something for a year, do it for 2 years, make a lot of money, move on to the next thing, right? Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've done a fair amount of research to find out that that's the principal difference between, there and here is that this is a much slower pace here. This is people go into business here often for 10, 20, 30, 50 years. It's not the same back home where it's much more competitive, a much more crowded space with all products. And you can see that when you go online, you go into Shen or any of these other things, is how many people are selling the same thing for a nickel here, a nickel left. It's the same product, but everyone's selling on price. And there's a frenzy of people that are, in the market one day and then they're shifted the next, then they're in that next market. It's different here. And I think once you climatize yourself to the fact you can do very, very well if you focus on the customer experience and selling on the value of that experience and making that product have good quality product with a good experience and backed up by good service, that people here will pay for that, whereas a lot of the rest of the world, they won't.
Mm. But
Does that
if you go to like if you want to do business with, say, those retailers, you want to be their provider, um, they're gonna negotiate price with you, right?
right? All right, so let me give you an example of that. Okay. This is an old story again. Let me give you an example. So, the automotive parts people, okay, these are people that sell parts to the auto shops. So the auto shops are retailers, right? You
Mhm.
have a problem with your car, you take your car to an auto shop, they fix it, charge you, you go home, right? But the auto shops need the parts in order to fix your car. So the auto parts are, in the old days, we used to call them wholesalers. The auto parts are the guys who sell to the retailers, right? So what happened years ago, and again, unfortunately, I can't remember the names of the companies, but it's an age-old story. It's a business story. They tell it in business school all the time. And the story goes like this. The auto parts industry was 100% based on price. In fact, they used the cost plus. It was like, okay, the part cost us, a dollar, we're going to sell it for $1.50 to the part. And then of course, all these auto parts companies were opening up left, right, and center. And the next guy come along and sell, I can sell it for $1.40. The next guy say, I can sell it for $1.30. So they were competing almost solely on price for years and years and years, almost a whole generation. Finally, some guy came along and said, that part that used to sell, we used to, it cost us a dollar. We sold it for $1.50, and now it's down to $1.10. And people are literally going out of business because by the time they take off all their other expenses, they can't make money at $1.10, but it's the only way you can be in business is to compete at $1.10. So everybody's selling at $1.10 till one smart guy comes along and says, okay, the only way that I can stay in this business, the only way that I can sustain myself is I've got to be able to charge $1.50. That's the only way I can do it. I can't make money at $1.10. But how am I going to compete with everybody else at $1.10? So anybody want to guess on this call what the guy did? Okay, I can tell by the silence no one wants to guess. All right. Does anybody know the answer? Okay, so let me tell you the answer. So what this guy did was he said, okay, right now, when when you take your car in, you take it in, let's say, oh, I've got a problem with the car. You show up at the auto guy at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the guy says, oh, okay, it's a transmission, it's gonna be $5,000, but it's gonna take me, about a day or two in order to get the transmission in, right? Because I have to order it. They'll deliver it tomorrow, probably around noon or 1 o'clock, and I can start work on it maybe around 2. It'll be ready probably in 2 to 3 days from now, right? That was a very, very typical thing. So what this guy said was, I'm going to charge you the $1.50 for the part, but I guarantee 1 hour delivery. So this way, you literally could have your customer come at 9. I'll guarantee that if you phone me right at 9 o'clock, I will have the part there by 10 o'clock, meaning that you can fix it, right? And have this customer out by the end of the day, fully fixed same day. So you now, as a retailer, can offer same day service. Come to us in by 9, guaranteed out by 5, no matter what the repair is. because they were getting their parts right away because they were paying a bit more for it. Now, for someone with a car who's got a young family that needs to go to school and doesn't want to go out and rent a car at 50 or $100 a day, because that's another expense to them, they sit there and say, if I can get my car back same day, but it's going to cost me an extra, $100 or $200, but I can get my car back the same day, I'm going to pay that money. Right. So all of a sudden, this guy basically took over the auto parts. And again, the names escape me, but he took over the industry. And because he was delivering parts right away. Now, let's go to a modern day version of that. Can anybody tell me what a modern day version of that? A company that came in and just basically completely eclipsed the retail market almost, I would say, overnight by human years. Yeah, it took a few years, but literally eclipsed the market in retail. Can anybody name that company that came in by doing something similar? Anybody ever heard of Amazon? What
Yes.
did Wow, of course. What did Amazon do? Are their products and services really any different? But why do you order from Amazon? Why? Because right now, if I got off the phone at 9 o'clock at night and said, gee, you know what? I need batteries for my mouse just went dead. It didn't. But if it did, what would I do? I probably know that Amazon would deliver it between 7 and 11 tomorrow morning. And I don't want to wait. I don't want to leave my house. I can't, I can't, I'm working. I'm working from home. I can't afford to go down, I can't afford, I don't want to go driving somewhere. And in Canada right now, it's cold and well, it's not so cold anymore. I don't want to drive through the snow. Got my kids at home, right? So what do we end up doing? Is what's the fastest and easiest way is I just go on Amazon, put the order in, and some guy in some truck shows up at 8 a.m. in the morning. By 9 o'clock, I got the batteries in my mouse, right? It was all they won all based on speed of delivery. I could have had, they asked me, I could have kept the bay open. I could have, if you remember, any you remember back far enough, I could have kept Eaton's and Simpsons open. No, not quite. That was before internet. I could have kept the bay open and made them very successful. Now, I didn't approach them. I didn't have any conversations with them, but there was a very easy way to make the bay very successful. Still could if they were open today. Any big retailer like that, I know how to make them successful. Now, they'd have to call me. They'd have to know that I can. And quite frankly, at this stage of my life, I don't have that interest. But I know exactly what I would have done. But people just don't get it. They don't understand because they're looking at it from a cost plus perspective. What was the Bay doing? Everything was on sale at half off. Well, how do you make money when you're selling everything at your cost, right? And then they were lowering it lower than their cost just to get inventory out the door, just to pay off their creditors, right? How do you make money? How is that a business proposition? But I would have easily turned that company around. I say that with a lot of confidence, and it sounds like, oh, Martin, how could if they couldn't, how could you? I could have. And again, it's all based on the fact it's understanding from the user. What do they want? Not, it's the buyer. Take your shoes off, put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. Understand what it is that they want from their perspective. Every company sells from the perspective of what they think the buyer wants. They don't sell it on the basis of really understanding what the buyer wants. They think, oh, yeah, of course, the buyer is going to want this, within 2 days, right? But do they ever actually ask the buyer? Some do. Apple does. Amazon does, right? They survey their audience all the time. What do you want? What can we do to be better? And they take all this into account, and then they say, you know what? These are the things we have to do this year. These are we have 100 things here, but this is the one that get most asked for. They want their deliveries faster than 24 hours. They want them within 8 hours. How do we do that? Is it drones? Is it distribution centers that are closer, mass distribution centers closer to communities? How do we do it? And they go out to logistics experts and say, how do we do it? Which presents opportunities for new businesses that put their hands up and say, wait a minute, if you'll allow us into your warehouse, we can get products, everybody within this area, within 8 hours. We want to be your distribution. So Amazon says, sure, go ahead. What's your price, right? They give them a price and they can give a little bit of a higher price because they're delivering it that much faster. So they can get a better price than the average courier. Why? Because they're willing to deliver it in 8 hours where the couriers are saying, no, it's going to be 2 days, but 2 days isn't acceptable because we're going to lose people to, a competitor to Amazon, right? So if you just think from the perspective of the buyer, what do they want, right? So in the particular case of the auto parts, it was a question of just getting stuff there so much faster. They could charge more, but because the retailer could say people don't mind paying it because they want their car back right away. They don't want to wait 3 days to get their car back, right? And it's just too much inconvenience, and especially in a one-car family where both people work and you're trying to, you guys know what it's like. You're trying to pick your kids up, get the groceries, go to the cleaners, then oh, my husband's coming home. He has to pick his wife up at and the car becomes like, we'd rather be dead than live without a car, right? That's what it becomes. So all of a sudden, now that's all going to change in the future because it's all going to be, it's all going to be autonomous and you won't own a car and these cars will be picking you up and taking, it'll become more like like an Uber service and nobody's going to own anything, right? Anyways, there's some other questions here. Let's see, uh, all right, that's a very good example. As a buyer, total cost. Okay, I think the next question was, is the minimum maximum loan amount minimum maximum for all small business in Canada, or what is it? And what is the latest they must repay the money? How much is the minimum maximum amount of the government funding, respectively? What are the fundamental reasons for each? Again, the only way I could answer that question is it varies. I don't think I could put a number to this. I think, it depends on, firstly, whether you're going to a bank, whether you're going to a private lender, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're asking within the bank system, what's the minimum maximums, it's really related based on all the things we talked about. They're going to look at your business plan. They're going to look at if you have contracts ahead of time. They're going to look at what income you currently have. They're going to look at your credit rating and they'll make a determination. So I would say to you, there's no magic formula to minimums and maximums. It's based on those criteria that everything that gets looked at on an independent basis, and loans get made based on based on that analysis. You're also asking is how much is the minimum maximum amount of government funding, respectively, and again ranges across the board. I can tell you I've gotten or been involved with loans that have been 5,000 and 10,000. And I've had government funding now up to $2.8 million. So the ranges I've worked with are anywhere from the smallest amounts of 5 and 10,000 up to about close to 3 million in funding based on grants from governments. There are higher ones, by the way, but you've got to show some pretty good. And by the way, on that 2.8 one, that was based on a company that had already taken an initial loan, at a small, like I think it was 50 or 100K, we got them, and then they graduated to 250K, and then a 1.1, and then a 1.5, and then a 2.8, if I remember correctly. So that was graduated loans because the government was seeing that, first of all, they were getting political gain from it, and they were seeing that the company was growing. And as a result of that, they were able to gain more. So Amazon, one stand shopping, right? And that's another great point. Is Amazon is a one-stop shop. You can get everything there. So what is it? What are they selling? Is it price? Convenience. One-stop shop, and we can get it to you right away. Are their prices always better? No, they're not. Sometimes they're the same. Do they have what's the number one reason people buy stuff at Costco? Price is probably up there, certainly is up there, but still, they have their margins and they stick to it. All right. So price is up there, but probably the number one reason, their return policy. I mean, you go back to Costco with something that's 25 years old and likely get a refund, right? It's crazy. But their refund policy is by far the best in the world. So how do they differentiate themselves is, first of all, they've created a lot of their own brand name products. Okay. A lot of it's their own brand name. So they've done that. And what they've done is they said, we're only going to pick one product per category, but it's going to be the best product in that category. If we're going to sell shampoo, it's going to be the best shampoo. And it's going to be returnable anytime you want to return it. So if you think of the convenience factor and the experience that people have at Costco, they go, hey, I can go in there and I can basically pick up anything off the shelf, whether it's peanut butter, whether it's hair color, whether it's salmon, whatever. You basically know there's going to be one selection. There'll be, one basket or whatever of bananas. There won't be all of these selections of different. There might be two. There might be like organic bananas and regular bananas, but that's all there'll be. And that's it. And they get from the best farms they possibly can. You're buying the best possible quality you can get. It's always at a very fair price. And you walk out of there. And even with that stuff, a week later, hey, it ripened too fast. Take it back, get a refund. So you can walk in there. They do all the thinking for you. So they do the thinking for you. It's like a brainless kind of shopping. I need teacups. They only sell one teacup, but it will be the best teacup at a really, a very, very fair price. And if I'm not happy, I can bring it back in 18 years from now and get a refund. I go in and buy with that assurance. What a brilliant, brilliant plan. Okay. I would argue, in my opinion, I think Costco is by far, unequivocally, the best retailer in the world. That's what I think. Okay. I love what they do. There's others I do love too, but I continually am amazed at that organization and the consistency of what they do. And it's amazing that nobody, well, Sam's in the States a little bit, but they're not Costco. But I would still say it's absolutely amazing that nobody else literally can compete with them. Not Walmart, not anybody. They have a very special way of doing things. So if you're going into business, look at these companies, look at Apple, look at Costco. You don't have to go to me. I've just looked at them so long that I have a lot of the answers, but look at these companies, see what they're doing, and ask yourself, am I buying here strictly because it's price? And in most cases, you probably will answer no. You'll say, no, it's the closest store to me. It's convenient. They have a good return policy. It's all of these other things. And, when I go in there, the store is clean. I have a good experience. It's like when you go to a restaurant. Do you feel good when you've seen, something run across the floor, some animal run across, or do you feel good when you go in and you've seen you know that the whole place front to back is clean and spotless and they've delivered a really good meal to you. And yeah, it may cost a little bit more than the other restaurant down the street, but it's clean. The people are friendly. The experience was great. They made me feel like somebody when I sat down at the table. All of that stuff matters. Okay, will foreign or immigrant enterprises and Canadian enterprises always be treated equal in all aspects? What is the fundamental cause? It's a great question. Don't know that I can really provide a great answer. I think in many cases, the level of equality shifts based on, quite frankly, the activity and what it is you're looking for. In fact, there are people here that have been here all their lives that are starting businesses where I've had them say to me, this isn't fair. And I said, what's not fair? Well, they have all these programs for newcomers, but I'm a Canadian here and I can't get a program. I can't get anyone to help me simply because I was born here. So I get that kind of attitude sometimes from people. Conversely, I will get people who will come to me and feel like they've been treated less equally because they are foreign. So I think it depends. There's so many factors into this. There's just so many factors that it's really, unfortunately, a question I can't give a great answer to, but that's just a couple of examples. And I think, you know what, sometimes fairness is something, the world, look, at the end of the day, we teach our kids this, life isn't fair. Life just It isn't fair, right? Some people, there's prejudice. Some people get treated differently. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about what you accept as well, right? If someone causes you a problem, then you go somewhere else. And that's what an entrepreneur does. An entrepreneur executes, an entrepreneur wins. How do you do that? Is that when someone causes you a problem, you go and find somebody who can fix it, right? That's what an entrepreneur is. It's having that passion and not taking no for an answer. Like no doesn't exist. You're on a journey to find yes. So if you find two no's, those are just two people that you found no's. Great. They're now eliminated. Where's the person that can give me a yes here? It's like that with life and everything. So in a lot of cases, I say, don't accept the unfair or the unbalanced, don't accept unequal, right? Make it equal, right? Don't accept unequal. You're in Canada. You're not living in a country where you are without your freedoms. You have your freedoms. So go and make it right. Go and make it equal is probably how I'd answer that. So Yi had to log off. So yeah, so she's gone. And so at this point, any other questions, comment, discussions you guys want to have? So I get Martin, are you a long-term Costco investor? They have dividends. Um, I'll answer that by saying I'm a long-time member. I think I'm a 35-year member. And I also am now, at least I wasn't many years ago, but I'd say in the past several years, I'll just use that terminology, I am a Costco investor as well. And I don't, promote them simply because I'm an investor. I'm a very small investor. I don't have, millions of dollars. I'm like everybody else. It's just, part of my investment portfolio. But I do have Costco, and I do very much believe in them as a provider, as a store, as a retailer, and a great example to the world of how to do things right. And if you guys haven't read their stories, the fun story is their dollar fifty hot dog and Coke, thing. Read the story about. I think you all probably know the story, but if you haven't, read the story about why Costco always has had that dollar fifty and why they always will have that dollar fifty, even if it costs them $10. They'll always be selling that hot dog and Coke for $1.50. Just fun stuff like that, fun facts that have made them the renowned corporation that they are today. So, Frank, back over to you. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, maybe we're getting to the point of sign off.
It's very informative. Yeah, a lot of information. Thank you. Yeah.
And very inspirational, Martin. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Mhm.
It's always my pleasure.
Yeah, I like that, like quality service over price.
Yeah.
That's the way, to have a very decent life.
It is, and it's a
Mm,
decent life for everybody involved, Young.
mm,
I mean, my comment would be is look at the things that are around today that are here because of quality. And I would I'd invite you just even to look at the restaurant business, right? And what are the best and most successful restaurants today? And one would argue probably the most expensive ones. Why? Why? Why wouldn't it be the cheapest ones? Now, you do have the McDonald's of the world. Now, I would also argue that McDonald's isn't necessarily cheap, right? It costs you a chunk of change to go there today. Like it's not an inexpensive meal. But having said that, you look at the highest end restaurants, some of the ones in Toronto, and you sit there and say, why does it take, 6 weeks to get a reservation at this place? And yet, you walk in there and it's $250 a person to have a meal, right? Yet you can't get a reservation there. Now, wouldn't it make sense if you sell on price only that the place would be empty? Why is it not only full every night, but why is there a 6-month waiting list just to get inside? Go into those restaurants and take a look and ask yourself, why? Look at it. Look what they offer. Because when you go there, it's a dining experience from the time you arrive to the time that you're greeted, to your first meal, and when you leave, the gift that you're handing. You don't even have to order dessert, but they come out and give you a takeaway dessert that's hand baked, an hour ago and handed to you just to take home as a memory of being at our restaurant. Like, go and look at what the best of the best do. You know, why has iPhone become the best selling phone in the world, right? So when you look at it, realize that the real successful companies are the ones that provided, particularly in North America and particularly in Canada, are the ones that provided quality first and said, hey, you know what? We're not gonna bend our ways. We'll compete on price to a degree. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to charge you $5,000 to sit and have a meal. It won't make sense. But I have no problem charging you $250 when everybody else is charging $15 and $20. But who's going to pay that and why? People who defend and admire quality. They want the best of everything. They want the best ingredients. They want the best service. They want to be made feel special. They want to have that experience. It's not just dining, it's a whole experience that they want to enjoy. So there are enough people out there that simply will pay to have that experience and therefore create a demand beyond the supply that they can provide, therefore the 6-month waiting list. So when you put it in perspective, it's how do you become that restaurant? Like, how do you become that person that is known as, oh man, these guys are expensive. But if, you've heard this expression, these guys are expensive, but they're worth every penny. Have you heard that before? Yeah, absolutely. You've heard that before. And that's what you want to be. And there are crazy industries that just never, ever get it. People like the cellular industry, okay, the cell phone industry. People, I don't even know how they stay in business, and it's horrible how they stay in business. It's like I look at that business and say there's got to be a better way. That business is just although they do make a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but they make it through very ruthless, cutthroat, ridiculous, backwards methodology. I mean, this is an industry that rewards their least faithful customers, right? So you get the best deal if you're a new customer. But if you're a faithful customer and a long-time customer, you get the worst deal. And we're not even going to tell you about the new deals that you're missing out on because you're already with us, right? So think about that mentality. And it's a Rogers mentality. I hate to say it. I mean, used to live beside the guy, but it's a crazy mentality. It's like, it's just, I don't get it. And this is why they're all, you see what's going on, the lawsuits back, and like, it's crazy. It's all about protecting their turf and who's paying more to get the licenses and who's paying more to the people who are giving the licenses. It becomes a very dirty business. And I don't like dirty businesses. I like clean businesses that, that operate by rewarding loyalty. Okay. You reward loyalty. You don't punish loyalty, right? So there are businesses that I could cite out there, which I look at and I just, they make money. They do, but I don't know for how long. And I do believe this, and I'll make the statement. I think these cellular companies in the next 5 to 10 years are all going to pay a very bitter price for what they've put Canadians through for the last 30 years. I think they're all going to pay the ultimate price. I think they are going to have what I call a Kodak moment or a BlackBerry moment, which is, I think they're going to disappear. And I think they're going to be replaced by a much smarter way of providing that service, which rewards loyalty and does things in a very, very different way. But again, I'm just preaching right now. This is just a prediction, but it's the same thing with automobile retailers. It's exactly the same thing. I just can't stand the industry. The way that they now, in fairness, at least they do tend to profess to reward loyalty, although the honesty is I don't think they do. And I think they do a lot of things that are, I don't think they got a great moral compass, and I think they do a lot of things ethically that are wrong. And I think that industry is going to be a Kodak moment as well. I think they're going to be replaced. Well, in fact, I would tell you with all certainty they're going to be replaced. They won't be around. They'll either be bought up, sold, they'll go out of business, they'll merge until there's nothing left. But they will very quickly be put out of business, and rightfully so, because they did everything wrong. They were about themselves. They weren't about the consumer. They didn't want to understand the consumer. They still don't want to understand the consumer. And they just want to sell, 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 all based on price, price, price. Do a lot of unethical things. You saw what happened when they went to diesel. Volkswagen went to diesel. They had to cheat on the diesel ratings in order to make that car sell, and then they got caught, and it hurt them severely. Ford just had the most amount of recalls of their cars in the last 3 years in the history of mankind because it was built wrong. And there's a whole story about the difference between Japanese manufacturing and North American manufacturing. It's another business story for another day. If you want to read a good book, it's Theory Z by William Uchi, a really good book about Japanese manufacturing. Although I don't even know today if it's necessarily still the same, but it's how Japanese manufacturing killed American manufacturing in the earlier days of automotive manufacturing back in the 70s and 80s, and why they were so successful and why their cars last forever and the American cars were falling apart after their first year. And it's just the story of the difference in the manufacturing and how they had kind of just in time manufacturing versus this buy everything at the front end to get the best price manufacturing. It's a whole other story for another day. Okay. Frank, should we wrap up at this point? There we go.
Sure, sure. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right. So
see you
with that,
in May. See you in May.
we will see you in May, and
Yeah.
I'll just tell you now that our topic in May will be lecture 6, and the topic will be marketing and sales in Canada. That's an interesting one. There's always a bit of a crossover in these lectures. So I've already talked a lot, or a little bit at least, about marketing and sales. This will be a more in-depth study of marketing and sales in Canada, and should be a pretty good and informative lecture for those of you who wish to join.
For inquiries, please contact info@eawlc.org or visit our website at www.eawlc.org.